Okay, so as many of you know, I've been out on the road traveling, doing the homeless thing, living in the wild, living with friends, living all over the place. And today my travels have brought me to Ralph DeMayo's house. He is the owner of WeatherWool, and as y'all know, I'm constantly wearing WeatherWool products in my videos and on my trips, and whether it's in an urban setting or if I'm out in the middle of nowhere in a snowstorm, I tend to be wearing Ralph's clothes. I'm definitely a big believer in it. So today I just wanted to kind of introduce y'all to the man who created all of this stuff and some of the, in my opinion, the best wool in the world. Kind of talk about his background, some of the products he offers, and what kind of separates WeatherWool from the rest of the pack. So, kind of my first question to you, Ralph, would be, what got you into this business? What's your background? What made you decide to want to produce WeatherWool?
I've always liked the outdoors. I always felt wool made the best outerwear for someone who's going to be facing the weather. And in the year 2000, I started selling woolens made by other people. After several years of selling what we felt were the best woolens on the market, I realized that there was still, good as they were, still a lot of room for improvement. So we created WeatherWool with the idea that we would make the absolute best woolen outerwear we could figure out how to make, and we would always be pure American. And that's the guiding philosophy of the company ever since.
So you did used to work for King of the Mountain, correct?
Well, I was King of the Mountain's biggest distributor for a while, and I had a lot of ideas that I'd gotten from talking to customers and learning about woolens, and I just decided that we would found WeatherWool in order to implement all those ideas. So as one small example, if you're going out in the weather, the last thing you want to be wearing is cotton if it's going to be cold and wet. It's routine in the woolen business to introduce cotton into the fabric. If you're never going to encounter water, that's not such a bad thing, but if you're going to spend much time outdoors, you're going to encounter water, at which point cotton becomes a serious liability.
Yeah.
So that's one small example of the type of thing that we decided to not do.
Well, as they say, cotton kills, and for a lot of you guys, I mean, it's real popular in the survival industry to wear wool year round, specifically in winter. But one of the main problems that I have found in the industry is that a lot of companies out there will use cotton threading. In the hoods, they'll use like cotton liners on the inside pockets, and just a lot of different places throughout their garments. You'll find that they'll add cotton. I guess it's a cost-saving thing. It doesn't make sense for someone who's going to spend a large amount of money for a high-end piece of wool equipment and then have the design have the worst possible fiber mixed in with the best possible fiber, and that's one of the reasons that I've always leaned towards WeatherWool. So why did you choose to pick the Rambouillet, like a high-end wool, versus going with kind of what the rest of the market has done? King of the Mountain, a lot of these companies, they charge the same amount for their products that you do, but they use a rough, almost kind of blanket wool that you can't necessarily, unless you're pretty hardy and love wool, you can't really wear it next to your skin like you can WeatherWool. So why did you decide to choose this product over the many other wool fibers available out there?
Well, it goes back to our original spec, to make the best that we could figure out how to make. In order for it to be the best, it needs to be comfortable against your skin. If it's not comfortable against your skin, you're going to have to wear something in between you and the wool, and you're going to wind up wearing your wool less often. If your wool is scratchy, it needs to be separated from your skin by perhaps long johns on your pants, or in the case of a jacket, they're going to put a liner fabric around the back of your neck.
Yep.
If you get soaking wet, if you fall in a river on a cold day, that liner fabric is going to turn into a wet rag on the back of your neck, which is a terrible place to have a wet rag on a cold day. That's not going to happen very often, but if you're out in the weather a lot, it's going to happen. You might get soaked in rain, you might get soaked in sweat, or you might fall out of your canoe. I don't want anybody wearing WeatherWool getting into a bad situation and thinking, I wish I had something else.
Yeah.
I want people wearing my stuff to think they've got the best.
And I think that's kind of the big deciding factor when you're looking at different wool products out there on the market, is that, a lot of these companies produce a wool that is warm, is durable, may have a good design, but is also very scratchy and rough. And so it tends to be something like you were saying that you're only going to want to wear with base layers because you don't really want it touching your skin. And, there's a lot of situations you find yourself in where you absolutely do not need or do not want to wear, layers underneath for whatever reason. And, having, the type of wool fiber that is something that you would see in a suit quality. I mean, it is something that you might see in a Saks Fifth Avenue store because of how soft it is, how comfortable it is, and it's not just something that you're going to wear when you're out in the wilderness. It's also something that you're going to wear to casual events. I mean, I go to dinners with family, parties, and my wool anorak, and people compliment me the same on it as they do out in the wilderness. It doesn't, it's not out of place. It's comfortable to wear in every environment. So would you rather spend, $300 to $400 on a wool garment that you're only going to wear out in the woods in the snow, or would you rather spend a couple of $100 more and have a piece of clothing that you're going to wear all the time? I personally wear mine, except in the hottest months in the summer. I wear it pretty much 3 seasons out of the year, or anything 75 degrees and below. And that's kind of what separates WeatherWool, at least for me, and why I choose it over other brands.
I mean, that is one of the reasons why we chose the very fine Rambouillet merino wool. It's the comfort factor which enables you to wear the wool over a wide range of temperatures and conditions. One of the drawbacks of wool is the weight. People tend to think the heavier the jacket is, the warmer it is. And if the wool is the same, if there's no other change, then yes, more wool will make a warmer jacket. But one of the things we can do by using better wool is we can reduce the weight, we can reduce the bulk, but still enhance the performance. Nobody will be surprised to hear that the finer materials you use, the better performance, the better quality product you can make, whether it's cars or hammers or pianos or whatever it is. Using the best materials will help you make a better product. In the case of the Rambouillet merino, the reason it's soft is because it's a fine diameter wool, which means that each fiber is thin. Thicker fibers are scratchier fibers because when they touch your skin, they tend to jab you. A finer fiber, a thinner fiber, kind of just bends when it touches your skin, so it doesn't have the itch factor. But another thing that a finer fiber does is it enables you to pack more of them into a given space. And so the more fibers you have packed into the same amount of space, the smaller the air pockets within your fiber, within your garment are. And so when the spaces in between the fibers are smaller, they'll resist wind and resist water better because those spaces are smaller. So you get not only the benefit of the softness, but you get a higher performing fabric. One of the reasons that other outerwear makers have avoided merino, Rambouillet merino, is because fine fibers, thin fibers, although they're comfortable, they tend not to be durable. It's a kind of making a tough but soft outer garment out of wool is kind of like marrying two natural enemies. In order to make that marriage compatible, basically what you need to do is go out and find very, very select merino. So it's not just that we're using merino, but we're using merino that's been specifically tested for its strength and durability. There are about 20 different lab tests that the different batches of wool are subjected to before we make our buying decisions. And when we are preparing to buy some wool, we look over the results, evaluate all these different lab parameters, and we're looking for a very fine diameter wool so it will be comfortable, but we're also looking for wool that's very strong for its diameter, and so it won't break. And it also needs to be a long fiber. The longer the fiber, the stronger it will make a fabric, because longer fibers make stronger yarn. However, longer fibers are also more expensive.
Yeah.
So what we wind up with actually is the easy way to find the best wool won't surprise anybody. Is to find the most expensive wool.
Yeah.
And so we basically buy the most expensive wool out there. But one of the lessons we learned when we started the company was we approached a number of woolen mills. We told them what we wanted to do, and they kept saying, well, here, use this. We have this stuff. It's ready to go. And I would check out the fabric, and it was nothing like what I wanted it to be. We were not able to make WeatherWool from any commercially available fabric.
Yeah.
And so it actually took us 3 years of trial and error to get our fabric to perform the way we wanted it to perform. It was a pretty long process, and it ultimately required us, like we were just talking about, to go all the way back to the raw wool. We know the ranchers that raised the sheep that grew the wool that I'm wearing. And in fact, the ranchers that we buy wool from tend to not really be selling wool. What those ranchers are mostly selling is the proof of their genetics. These ranchers are mainly selling sheep to other ranchers that want to improve their bloodlines, but they sell wool in relatively small quantities because the wool that their sheep grow is sort of the proof of their genetics. If we were making 10,000 jackets a year, the ranchers that we buy from at present wouldn't be able to supply that demand.
Right.
The demand for high-end wool is growing, and so a few years down the road that situation might change. But right now we're buying from ranchers who are basically in the business of selling sheep rather than in the business of selling wool.
And your wool is approximately 5 times more expensive than standard merino wool, right?
Right. Well, last time we bought wool, the going rate for typical woolen outerwear, raw wool, was 65 cents a pound, and we paid $3.23 a pound.
Yeah, and that fluctuates a lot, I'm sure.
It does. It depends on what the fashion industry is doing, what the weather has been, etc. And for us, we have the added wrinkle of always being pure American, so we don't really care what's going on in Australia or New Zealand in the sense that we won't buy it.
Yeah, and this is the only product that I'm aware of out there that is completely 100% American made, down to the threads. The threading that is in this material is a military grade hydrophobic threading, where everyone else is using cotton out there. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about WeatherWool and present some of these products to my crowd out there, is because there's really nobody else doing this. There's nobody else creating a wool like this that I'm aware of, and it's started to become more popular in the survival industry. In fact, I found out about WeatherWool through a good buddy of mine, Tom Brown III. He ran the largest survival school in the world, the Tracker School. He also works up in Trackers Northwest, and he told me about this stuff, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to try it out. I'm gonna see what their stuff's made of, and here I am a year and a half later, and I've got 2 anoraks, a pair of pants, and I'm running around his shop here like a kid in a candy store. I'm like, what can I get next, Ralph? Like right now, I'm currently wearing a Mouton jacket, and this is essentially
Mouton Vest.
Yeah, that's right. And I have 3 sheep on me at this very moment, and each one of these sheep's hides, before it's processed, before it's put in a jacket or anything, it's $100 just for that hide. So that's where, a lot of the costs, a lot of these, you guys are going to look at the pricing on the website, and you're going to think, well, why shouldn't I get the anorak that's, a couple $100 cheaper? And I'm telling you, hands down, that there is a significant difference in material. In fact, I was talking with Ralph yesterday, and a lot of the times his customers come from people who have directly touched the fabric. You see it on a website, you see it online, and you don't really know what you're working with, so you really kind of need somebody who's either an expert in the subject or somebody you trust, such as our channel, or you need to personally feel it and try it out on your own. And it's a very niche market for the stuff that he's producing. But like I said, in my opinion, it's kind of some of the best stuff out there. And what's crazy is I'm wearing, 3 sheep, an anorak, who knows how many sheep it took to put all this material together. and it's about 75 degrees in this house. And this jacket, I mean, his Mouton jackets are rated for like -30. They wear them in the Arctic Circle. They wear them in some of the coldest places on the planet. And here I am sitting in 75 degrees inside of a house, not sweating a bit. And that's the one kind of major difference for me on why I chose WeatherWool over some of the other ones is temperature regulation. Because, you know, as a full-time survival instructor, of course I'm out in the field. Of course I'm out in, you know, cold conditions quite regularly. But, you know, I'm also going to Walmart and, you know, going shopping with my kids, and, you know, I'm in and out of places, you know, left and right. I'm going to social events, these kind of things. And so I need a piece of clothing that's not just going to hang in the closet for when I'm waiting for the next blizzard to come through. If I'm going to invest this kind of money into a piece of clothing, I want it to be something that I'm going to wear regularly. And WeatherWool has kind of figured out, you know, in my opinion, the best stuff out there for that. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the components of WeatherWool and you know, the quality of the type of wool that you're using. Let's talk about the difference between you and the competitors. What kind of separates WeatherWool from a company like King of the Mountain or Sleeping Indian or somebody even like Empire Wool and Canvas? A real popular anorak out there has been the Leicester River bushcraft anorak, which is a good anorak. I own one. I own King of the Mountain. I own an Empire wool and canvas jacket. I've got all that stuff, and while they do produce, you know, good quality products, it's like light years difference. I mean, very scratchy wool. I'm not as big a fan of the design. So let's just kind of go over what separates you from the big boys out there, King of the Mountain and some of those others.
You know, I think it's really very basic. I think it's our philosophy, and that's why we started the company. I can't say that I know all the woolens that are out there on the market, but I had been selling other people's woolens for quite a while before I founded WeatherWool, and the reason we founded WeatherWool was because there were a lot of stones left unturned. I just felt very simply that there wasn't anyone who was doing everything they could to make the most bulletproof product they could come up with. I was selling really good stuff, the best stuff on the market that I knew of, but at the same time, I'd be talking to people who were doing some crazy stuff, you know, and I would say like, that's what you do? And I'd be thinking, well, I'm really glad that I'm selling good wool. I wouldn't want to sell anything better, anything less than the best that I knew of. But at the same time, I was aware that people were cutting corners in order to save money. And wow, it's great to save money, but I didn't want to save money at the expense of reducing the quality of my product when I knew that some of the people wearing this stuff would be doing the most intense things imaginable. People going off for weeks at a time into the mountains of Afghanistan or someplace on actual combat missions where the temperature might be 80, it might be 20 below. They might have to hide all night in a cave. Everything that they need to keep them going for 3 weeks has to be carried on their back. Those guys just need the best, and sometimes it wouldn't be military people. It might be some photographer who photographers do some crazy stuff in order to get pictures of the caribou migration or a wolf killing a moose or something.
Yeah.
Some of those guys are heavy duty. Some of the bushcraft people, they might go off into the Canadian boreal, and their plan is to walk for 3 weeks from here to there by themselves with nothing to take care of them but whatever it is that they can carry, and they just need to be ready to face whatever comes their way. I felt nothing does that better than wool, so that's why I was in wool in the first place. But
explain to me real quick, we talked about this the other day. From what you were telling me, a lot of these companies that say 100% virgin wool isn't necessarily 100% wool.
Right.
Because they don't have to advertise the manufacturing process of how that is built out. So explain that to us
right, so
a
people
little bit.
don't really think about what the label means. You know, virgin wool is just wool that's never been used before, so that's clear enough. 100% virgin wool means that all the wool in the garment is 100% virgin, but it doesn't mean that the garment is 100% wool. So you can see a label that's very truthfully saying 10% cotton, 90% 100% virgin wool. They won't actually say that though. They'll just say 100% virgin wool, and they'll let people think that it means the garment is 100% wool. But the garments typically are not 100% wool. And so that was one of the things we thought of right away is if wool is the best thing to make a garment out of for a person who's going to face nature, face weather, you would want the garment to be 100% wool. And so when we began researching WeatherWool, how would we do this, we talked to the mills and they kept steering us to the fabrics that they already had. You know, they're kind of off-the-shelf fabrics.
Mm-hmm.
And their off-the-shelf fabrics contain cotton because that's just the industry standard. Most people don't really mind 10% cotton. And if you don't get wet, it really isn't a problem. But if you're going to be out in nature for extended periods of time, you're going to get sweaty, you're going to get rained on, you might fall in a river.
Explain how those looms work.
The way cotton gets into woolen fabric is that cotton is relatively cheap and plentiful and it's comfortable. People like it. And so what they do with the typical woven fabric is there are fibers running lengthwise through the bolt of fabric, long fibers. These are called the warp fibers and they're usually cotton. So if you imagine the bolt of fabric kind of running lengthwise like this, it's kind of typical, not our stuff, but typical woolen fabrics. The cotton fibers are running this way, and the wool is woven back and forth in between the cotton. So what you wind up with is a fabric that's about 90% wool and 10% cotton. And for most applications, it's okay.
And they still claim that it's 100% cotton or 100% wool. Correct?
Well, no, they won't claim that. They'll claim it's 100% virgin wool because the wool that they're using is 100% virgin wool.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read the labels carefully, the entire label, it'll say somewhere, it should say 10%, 12% cotton, whatever.
Right.
But people will call it a woolen coat. It is a woolen coat. I mean, that's not a problem. It's not illegal to say that. And for most people, it isn't a problem. If it's a coat that a guy is just going to wear to jump into his car on a cold winter day, it won't matter. But if you're an outdoorsman who wants something that's going to be the best you can get to protect you from what might turn into a very serious situation, you don't want that cotton in there.
Here's another thing that interested me about WeatherWool. So when you go to these sheep farms, most sheep farms use polypropylene bags, and that can actually affect the quality of the wool, which I didn't know until I'd met Ralph. So why don't you explain that a little bit too?
It's something that I didn't know either. Backing up a little bit, there is an enormous amount to know about wool and to know about sheep, and I've learned more than I ever thought there was to know. But what I've also learned is that I only know a small amount of what there is to know. There's just a huge body of knowledge built up because people have been wearing wool for 8,000 years that we know of. Mm-hmm. So as far as polypro goes, polypropylene tarps, polypropylene feed bags are very handy. They're convenient, they're cheap, etc.
Everybody uses them.
Right. Well, when you leave polypro out in the rain, whether it's a feed bag, a blanket, whatever it is, polypro gets chewed up by the weather, the wind. Everybody's seen polypropylene tarps get shredded over time just out in the wind. Well, that polypro mixes actually pretty well with the fleece of a sheep. When the sheep are sheared, their fleece is full of sticks and grass and even small pebbles. And if there's polypropylene around the ranch, bits of polypro will get mixed up in the fleece as well. When the fleece is cleaned, the methods that are used to scour it, as it's called, can remove the vegetable matter, can remove the sticks and little pebbles, cannot remove the polypropylene. There's no good way of getting the polypropylene out of there. And what's even more frustrating is that you don't even see it. You don't realize it's there until you make a fabric and then you dye your fabric green, and the polypropylene doesn't accept the green dye. The polypropylene winds up being a different color, and so now at kind of like at the end of things, you've got little bits of something that aren't the right color, and it also weakens the fabric. So it's not something that makes the fabric a lot weaker because there's not going to be much of it, but it is unsightly, and it's something that the labs test for. They test for the presence of polypropylene, but also a ranch needs to be certified as polypropylene free. It'll just be sort of a grading on the ranch itself, that they don't have any polypro anywhere around.
So that takes the overall stockpile of woolen,
Right.
producers that you can actually.
It brings it down. It brings it down quite a bit. There are other things too. Most people have probably seen that ranchers often paint numbers on their livestock. A lot of times that doesn't matter, but for our purposes, we can't have sheep that have ever had a number painted on them.
Mm-hmm.
The sheep wear ear tags, but no numbers have been painted on them.
Right.
The sheep, it won't surprise anybody that in order to make the best woolen garment, you need to start with the best wool. And the wool that we buy is tested across about 20 different parameters that measure different aspects of its quality and different characteristics that will give you an idea of what kind of fabric you can make from it. One of the things that we need is a fiber that's very thin, because a thin fiber is comfortable on the skin. A thick fiber tends to jab you when your skin encounters the end of it, whereas a thin fiber just bends and is comfortable against your skin. Thin fibers, however, tend to be weaker fibers. Other things being equal, thin fibers are weaker, and that's the main reason why other companies do not make outerwear made for rugged applications from thin fibers. They tend to just get ruined quickly because they're not tough.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to marry toughness and comfort, you need to stand on your head a little bit. You need to be very, very careful about the selection of the fibers that you choose in order to compensate for the thinness with other ways of making it tough. And so what we need to do, or what we do, is we buy fibers from sheep that are very, very healthy and have been bred to produce a fiber that's both thin, meaning comfortable, but also tough. So one of the parameters that we look at in our lab test is how strong the fiber is. And they test strength by literally taking a single strand of wool and hanging a weight off the end and seeing how much weight it can hold before it breaks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a minimum break strength that we look for, but also, where does it break? You want the break to occur at one end of the fiber or the other. You don't want it to break in the middle, because if it breaks near the end, it almost doesn't matter if it's right at the end.
Mm-hmm.
If it breaks in the middle, now your fiber is only half as long. And one of the ways that you marry softness and strength of fabric is by using long fibers. The longer the fiber is, the stronger the yarn can be that you make from that fiber, because part of what makes a yarn strong is the friction of the fibers intertwining and then holding up against each other. When you pull them, it's friction that's keeping the fiber together. Because remember, each fiber is only, our fibers are about 4 inches long, which is pretty long and is actually about as long as the spinning machines can comfortably handle.
Mm-hmm.
So what we want is a fiber that's right about 4 inches long. And when those fibers are spun together, when you go to pull that yarn apart, it's not that you're breaking individual fibers apart when you pull that yarn to snap it. What you're doing is you're causing the fibers to slip back against each other till eventually they sort of let go of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer the fiber, the less of a tendency they have to do that. So we want long fibers that are strong, but also just the fact that they're long is important. And then how much tensile strength do they have? When they do break, where does the break occur?
Right.
Another thing that we look at is what they call crimp. And so a woolen fiber is not just straight like my finger is sort of straight. The woolen fiber might be 4 inches long, but it's going like this.
Mm-hmm.
And what the crimp does is it enhances its performance in terms of wind resistance, water resistance, and in particular, warmth. The crimp creates dead air space. It traps air. And of course, trapped air is what insulation is about.
Right. And one of the things I love is that, you know, a lot of these products have different weights, and each, kind of jacket that he's created, or shirt jacket, or anorak, they're available with, a few different options. If you want a pair of pants, for instance, it can be had in a mid-weight or a full weight. And when I tell you the full weight it is a heavy material. I prefer the full weight over the mid-weight, just because the temperature regulation on the fiber is so good anyway. I would rather have overkill because I'm not going to overheat in that garment anyway, especially with a lot of the designs that he's added. I mean, probably the biggest thing that I love about my anorak is it's the only one that has side zips that I'm aware of, and that is a big deal. I mean, not going out, or when you're going out, not sweating and being able to regulate your core temperature, in essence, is one of the most important things for us as survival instructors, bushcrafters, whatever. And the difference between this fiber is it's not only softer and more wearable, but it just regulates temperature better. I mean, I'm sitting in here in a Mouton Vest right now, and this kind of vest is, typically worn around the Arctic Circle. You also could wear it to a 5-star, steakhouse and have a nice meal with your sweetheart. But, I'm sitting in a 75-degree house, and I am thermoregulating just fine. I'm not sweating. I'm not hot at all. And that is kind of the key thing when we look at garments for the outdoors. So if you go to pick up a piece of Gore-Tex, for instance, one of the main considerations with any type of wet weather gear is how is it going to regulate my core body temperature? Is it going to allow moisture to escape? And, the thing that is different about wool versus a lot of these other synthetic materials is that it will regulate your core body temperature in most temps, and then you can also get it soaking wet and you're still going to stay warm. Whereas with a piece of Gore-Tex, for instance, and don't get me wrong, I'm not against Gore-Tex. I own a lot of Gore-Tex products. They have their use. But any type of shell that you were to throw over, those types of fibers is essentially going to trap moisture inside it. And that becomes a problem because once that moisture builds up on your skin, starts to freeze, you have issues with your, core temperature regulation. So, all of these things are a factor when, choosing a type of clothing for a specific environment. But of all the things that are available out there on the market, wool is the most universal. I mean, when I go to the jungle, I wear wool socks and wool underwear. I might not be wearing wool clothing, but wool fibers have a use in every place on the planet, from the coldest environments to the warmest, wettest, nastiest, types of places that you can go. So,
well, I mean, that's probably key to the whole discussion, in my opinion. There is no material that's perfect for all applications.
Yeah.
Everything needs to be used within its best parameters. But there's only so much you can have with you at any one time.
Yeah.
If you're going out in the weather and you don't know what's coming your way, could be hot, could be cold, could be windy, could be snowy, could encounter fire.
Yeah.
You could have to crawl through dirt or something for a mile. You might have to swim across a stream. You just don't know what nature might throw at you.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the only choice is wool. And one of the things that I have learned over the many years I've been selling woolens is that I don't know very much. I don't have a lot of personal experience. I've been out there for many years, but I'm a kind of a cupcake guy. In New Jersey, I don't go very far. I don't do anything heavy duty. But I talk to people who do. I talk to some of the most far out people going. And those guys, the ones who I think really know what they're doing, who've been out there in crazy situations for days and weeks on end, every one of those guys is wool.
Yeah, all of them. And it's pretty universal across the survival industry. I mean, if you talk to most major instructors, I mean, they're wearing wool all the time. Now, don't get me wrong, I love products like down, I love Gore-Tex, I love synthetic materials, but they have very specific applications. And it's like you said, if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, if you find yourself in an environment where it might be, -10 you know, at nighttime, and then warm up to 45, 50 degrees during the day, which I have seen in Missouri before. You know, a down product can get wet in that change of environment, or it gets wet through use over time. So if I'm wearing a down jacket for a week straight, you know, the moisture from my body gets into that insulation and begins to compromise it over time. And that's pretty much universal across every other fiber out there except for wool. So, you know, there's a lot of choices out there, but you know, if you're going to spend the money on the best of the best product, and I'm not trying to sell you budget bushcraft, budget items. There's a million other guys out there on YouTube that will tell you about what the cheapest item is you can get for the money. And I really want to take a different approach and show you professionals and people who really are about the business of adventure or about going to dangerous places, showing you some options on what's available. Okay, so I just wanted to show y'all some of the options. As far as what Sigma 3 sells, we pretty much just sell the anorak and the pants, and you know, we'd appreciate it if y'all purchase that through us to help support, you know, what we're doing here. But if you have an interest in getting some of you know, Ralph's other products, he's got a whole different line of things, you know, from gaiters and really cool hats to super high-end like Mouton jackets that you'd wear around the Arctic Circle. That's what I happen to be kind of wearing right here. But one of his favorite products is the all-around field jacket, and I'm just going to let him talk about that a little bit.
If you were going to get one piece of WeatherWool that would give you a good sense of what WeatherWool could do, I would definitely recommend you get what we call our all-around jacket. The reason for that is it's made with our full weight material, which over one light base layer you can wear in temperatures down as low as 0 Fahrenheit or so, 17, 18 below Celsius. That'll depend upon who you are, and it'll depend, of course, also, yes it is, okay, also on how much wind there is. But what's interesting about the all-around jacket is that it has what we call a double yoke, which is a second layer of wool across the shoulders, the chest. It also has the second layer in the back, and that enhances its ability to resist wind and makes it a lot warmer than it otherwise might be. But also, the second layer of wool makes the jacket almost rainproof. And so, one of the things, of course, that you're going to encounter if you're out in the weather a lot is you're going to get rained on at times when you might not expect it. With the all-around jacket, I have been out in the rain from before sunup to after dark, wearing nothing but wool and not gotten wet. The jacket got wet, the jacket got good and wet, but I didn't get wet. And the particular day that I'm thinking of, anyone else would have worn rain gear, but I wanted to see how long it would take for my all-around jacket to get wet. Temperature was 35 Fahrenheit, basically 1 degree Celsius, just above freezing, out all day long. Perfect temperatures to die of hypothermia. But I didn't get wet, and all I was wearing was wool. And that's because when this first layer of wool gets wet, rather than the second layer of wool getting soaked, what happens is the rain just starts running down the outside of the jacket. That's one of the reasons we have these storm flaps here over the cargo pockets. The first jackets we made just had a zipper here, and when I wore it out in the rain running down my jacket would drown the stuff in my pockets. So we added this storm flap over the pocket, and we actually angled it downwards so that when rain comes like this and slides down the jacket, it encounters this angle and it slides off. Even our fabric itself is made with the idea of shedding rain. We use, for all of our fabrics, we use what's called a jacquard loom, which is a sort of a three-dimensional way of weaving the fabric, which enhances weather resistance, wind and rain, but also we nap the fabric. We brush it in a way that enhances the warmth, but also causes water to sort of slide down the jacket this way. It just naturally runs down. The all-around jacket also has not only buttons over the front, but a center front zipper that's protected by a storm flap. So this is a number 10 Vislon YKK zipper, about the best zipper you can get for the purpose. Chunky. And it's a double zipper, meaning that you can open it from both the top and the bottom at the same time, which is important for reasons of temperature regulation. but also the zipper is protected by a storm flap, partly to increase the level of warmth, partly just to protect the zipper itself from getting iced up. If you're caught out in an icy, rainy, windy day, a typical zipper can pick up ice here and wind up getting frozen shut or frozen open. And if you have a jacket without a storm flap, that's much more likely. But also, if you have a jacket without a storm flap and you do damage your zipper, now suddenly you have a jacket the front of which is no longer working properly.
And
so
I'll tell you one of the big things that is of notice to me as a person who's owned a lot of wool clothes is that no other manufacturer that I have used uses slot buttons. And essentially what slot buttons does is it takes the whole threading, and failure of the button out of the process entirely. I've owned a lot of Columbia stuff and other brands of wool products where the buttons would pop off in a year and then I'm paying, a seamstress to sew it back on. These things, I couldn't pop one of these off if I wanted to. I mean, it's like a strip of military grade fabric that runs the whole length of it. And then there's literally slots that material goes through. So there's absolutely no chance that any of these buttons are going to pop off on you. It's the same on the wool anoraks and all of his products. And the slot button is, you said something, it's like 75 times more expensive to do than a normal button?
Well, the buttons themselves are about 25 times more expensive than a typical button, but the labor of putting a slot button on is far higher than a typical button because there's no machine that does it, and because the tailors are nowhere near as used to it. All the tailors are very used to dealing with regular old buttons. They've done it a million times, but slot buttons they typically haven't worked with before, so they need to be very careful. They have to line all this up just right, and they have to do it before they sew this down. So the button itself isn't sewed to the garment at all. It's like Rob was saying, there's a strip of fabric that runs down the jacket, up through one slot, down through the next slot, and then down again. And so the tailors need to sew all this down in exactly the right spot, get the line just straight, get the spacing just right, so that it matches up with the buttonhole. They just aren't used to doing that, so the labor of making a jacket with slot buttons is way more than the labor of a regular button.
So kind of the difference between something like this, the all-around jacket, is you've got areas that are double lined, full weight, double shoulders, double hood.
Right.
So the anorak is going to have a single lining, which I have found to 10 degrees with a base layer I'm perfectly comfortable with. So, having a double layer of this stuff is, in my opinion, better than twice as good because you have that dead airspace in between the layers.
It is more than twice as good. But we felt that when we designed the addition to the hood, that since we already had a double yoke, we would make the hood as substantial as the double yoke part of the jacket. So the idea is if you're climbing up a mountain, you get really warm or whatever, then you're going to sit down and take some pictures with your camera or just rest and have lunch. You want to put this up over your head, and any wind coming from the back or the sides really isn't going to get to you. And this hood is actually a very large hood. I kind of call it a Grim Reaper hood, and what I mean by that is from the side you can pull this hood out and it'll extend beyond your face, so that if you have a wind coming from the side, that wind just isn't going to get to you. If you want, you can pull it back a little bit. There are adjustments, or you can pull it down, etc.
Like the anorak.
But really,
you can adjust those.
You want to protect your head if you're out in serious conditions, and this hood will definitely do that.
All right, well let's move on to some of your other products then. All right, so obviously you've got a ton of products to choose from, and you kind of have some entry-level stuff all the way up to like the super premium, which we'll get to here in a minute, which is what I'm wearing. It's the most pimp piece of clothing I've ever had on my body in my whole life. But so we sell the anorak for $5.75 on survivalgear.us, but they have a similar product, which is a hoodie, which is a front zippered model, which is $4.25. And so if you've done any price comparisons, a company like Leicester River or Empire Wool and Canvas, their hoodies or anoraks are about, $300 and some change depending on some sizes. So you can get, a similar type of product for just a little bit more, and it's less than the anorak. In fact, I didn't even know these were available until recently, and I'm thinking that we should add these to the website. But just tell everybody about your hoodie design. And
Sure. Well, the hoodie is a pretty classic hoodie design. What we've done is we've done it in our wool, and we've made the hoodies in 2 weights wool. This happens to be a full weight hoodie, but we also make the hoodie in what we call midweight, and the difference is that midweight is about 35% lighter than full weight. So it is a substantial difference in the weight of it. Both of them have a lot of warmth, a lot of weather resistance. Which one you get is a matter of personal preference. The price is not any different. The hoodies have hand warmer pockets on the side, like all of our garments that zip up the front. They have a heavy duty double zipper. You're not making a serious outdoor garment if you don't have a double zipper, in my opinion. We have inside pockets for here it is, inside pocket for a cell phone. We have a very substantial hood. Again, it's my preference is for what I call a Grim Reaper hood. And what I mean by that is the hood is big enough that you can really bury your face in there, kind of like almost like a snorkel hood. And weather coming from the side is not going to get to your face, and there's nothing like feeling a strong wind pushing against your cheek and having your wool absorb all the snow or rain or weather that's coming from the side and not reaching you. We have, what's unusual for hoodies is that these are 100% merino knit cuffs and knit ribs. We are actually, ridiculous as it sounds, we are evidently the only company in the USA making merino knit cuffs. We weren't going to put acrylic or cotton cuffs on our garments. We don't do anything but wool, so we went to great lengths to actually make our own woolen cuffs and woolen ribs, which are the piece here along the side. The hoodies are cut in what we call an urban cut, and that was bowing to the tradition that younger people love the hoodie design, and younger people tend to be 6 feet tall and 155 pounds. So the hoodies aren't exactly cut for me, but we do make them in sizes up to 5X, and the hoodies are popular with people of all ages and all dimensions.
so in the lower price range, we got stuff like the
shirt jack.
the shirt jack, and then you've got the hoodie. One step up, my favorite, the anorak. You're looking at a $475 for that, and that's all the same price. I mean, that's pretty much the same price as King of the Mountain and these other ones for a far not nearly as good of wool. So you got these 2 items, $425. He's got hats, gaiters, stuff like that. The anorak is $575. I personally believe it's worth the upgrade. And remember that a lot of the pricing on this stuff, I mean, the tailoring on this is very, very expensive. And, so for,
all the labor is by Americans, and these are people in the USA, working in the USA, and legal immigrants with health insurance and whatever else. It's not a sweatshop kind of a thing. Everything is totally above board, and always with WeatherWool, totally American labor and materials.
Yeah. All right, so we've got these 2 items. Let's talk about your ultra premium. This is for either people with lots of money and want to look really good in New York City, walking down 5th Street, or somebody who wants to go to the Arctic Circle and wants to stay ridiculously warm. I'm currently wearing the vest version of this, which I'm absolutely obsessed with. I have been, toting it around the house like a whoopee or something, and it's just the softest material I've ever, felt, especially for wool. And there's literally 3 dead sheep here, and each one of these wool sheep pelts is like $100 a piece. And just kind of explain Mouton and
Right, Mouton is just a French word for sheep. And almost 100 years ago, when beaver was really, really popular, they started looking for alternatives to beaver, something that would give the performance and the warmth of it. And they came up with what they called Mouton. And what the Mouton is the very highest grade of lamb's pelt, but it's processed differently. So most people are familiar with shearling. Shearling is the typical lamb's pelt, Mouton is the very highest grade of it. It's very plush, it's very thick, it's sheared to a uniform 5/8 inch. But also what's interesting about Mouton is it turns out that when you take a lamb's pelt and heat it to very high temperatures, it makes the wool much softer and silkier than it otherwise would be. And that's why Mouton feels this way, is it's been heat treated, which is kind of interesting. But as a result of that, you get this wool. It's still natural fleece. It feels very soft and very silky, but it tends to stand up, and that's partly because it's so thick. But it tends to stand up, so it's standing up about 5/8 of an inch. It's actually sheared to 5/8 inch, so you have a huge amount of loft because of all that wool. But also, the Mouton still has the leather from the pelt of the lamb. So in between, in the middle of this jacket, which you can't see, is the leather from the pelt. So like a leather jacket that's worn by a motorcycle guy, the leather in the middle of this jacket will knock any wind down. It really won't matter how windy it gets. The wind will not get through here. So if the temperature plummets to something horrible, you have the insulation provided by all of this wool plus our fabric on the outside. And if the wind kicks up to it, doesn't really matter what, you have the leather in between here that just knocks the wind flat. So
Yeah.
these jackets have been tested up at Ice Camp Sargo, where the U.S. Army built a camp on the pack ice of the Arctic Ocean, and temperatures were far, far below 0 Fahrenheit or Celsius, and howling winds, no problem at all. There's more information about that on our website, but basically anything, any temperature, any weather conditions that are gonna occur in North America, whether it's cold or wind, will not be a problem in the Mouton Vest or the Mouton Jacket.
This is double layered, full weight, all throughout the arms and the body. And then, is this like another third layer on top?
Yeah, just the elbow.
For the
right,
elbow?
right.
So in some areas, there's 3 layers.
And then it's a stovepipe collar, which is, you can bring this all the way up to your nose and kind of hide inside it there.
Yeah, this is, I really love this jacket. Like, I love the vest. I want this thing, but it is so like bomber heavy duty. I just feel like I wouldn't use it as much. Whereas with the vest, I can take this in any conditions in North America, and I could throw this over anything I'm wearing underneath, and I'm gonna absolutely stay warm. So we're trying to work a deal where I'll sell my soul to get this vest into my closet at the moment. It is just amazing. And I just can't say enough about this Mouton. I've seen a lot of jackets out there that put these type of, fluffy liners on the inside, but I've never seen one that's 100% wool. I mean, literally, like, there is sheep's hide here, So you get the best, it kind of reminds me of, something that Eskimos would wear. I mean, it's very similar.
Well, it is because they would wear
the hide.
Right. They would wear caribou skins typically, and they wear the fur, the hair on the inside, because that's what gives you the warmth.
Yeah.
And the leather is on the outside, which kills the wind.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea. The purpose of the wool for the sheep or the caribou, the hair, is to trap dead air around the animal, and the dead air is trapped around you by having this inside rather than outside.
What would you say that way? That's probably 2.5 pounds.
No, I think it's more than that. I think it's more like 4.
4, you think so? Yeah.
We can
Super
research
heavy
that.
duty. We should weigh that.
We also make a Mouton hat, so if you want to get a sense of what the Mouton is like, give me a second. I'll just grab a hat.
They also have these things can have a hood attached as well, so you can have a completely Mouton hood. And this jacket's super pricey. I mean, you're looking at, I think, $1,800 for it. But on the flip side, I've known guys. I mean, we do training around the Arctic Circle with a guy named Toby Cowan, and he spends $1,500 to $1,800 on his sleeping bags to go to those areas. So it's not that much of a stretch if you're going to a very extreme environment to purchase something clothing-wise around that price. I mean, imagine what you would pay if you wanted to wear what the Eskimos wear. Working those hides. I mean, to try to get a buckskin suit, you're going to pay at a minimum of $2,000 for a buckskin suit. And I can assure you it's not going to be as comfortable or nearly as warm as anything along these lines. So,
if you want to get a sense of what the Mouton can do, this is our Mouton hat. These are $225, and this is completely lined with the Mouton. It has the leather in the middle, just like the vest and the jacket does. Our full weight fabric on the outside, and the hat can be worn.
It's like Gomer Pyle.
The hat can be worn a few different ways. You can flip the lid up, the brim up, I should say. You can put the straps up on top. You can put the straps behind, or you can fasten the straps underneath your chin.
Yep. All right. So that kind of sums up. I mean, he's got a lot more products. I mean, he sells axes and all kinds of things. Just take a look at his website, and you know, if you've got any questions, hit up either Sigma 3 or Ralph over here at WeatherWool, and he'll take care of you. So appreciate y'all for tuning into this
Thank you very much.
longest YouTube video we've ever done. But I love this stuff so much, it was worth the extra time to just kind of talk about why this product is worth the money, because I know a lot of you guys are going to want to string and quarter me for, you know, pushing a product that's more expensive. But when you believe in something, you believe in it. And,
Well,
you know, I just want to put it out there.
We believe in it too, and one of the things I like to stress to people is that you're not risking really anything with WeatherWool. You can return WeatherWool to us after a couple of months of use. If you're not happy with it, just send it back and we'll give you a full refund. It virtually never happens. I think the only times it's happened really are when people just needed the money back. But even if that's the case, we're not worried about it. The only thing we'll ever be satisfied with is a completely happy customer. So if somebody gets some WeatherWool and for whatever reason they decide months later that they don't want it, we'll give you a full refund. There really isn't any risk here, but basically everyone is happy with the performance of WeatherWool. If it works for you in your living room, if it fits in the living room, I can guarantee you that you'll be happy with it once you get it out in the weather.
Best customer service in the industry. If you've got a problem, or if you need a modification, or if you need something taken care of, Ralph is the guy. So don't hesitate. You know, if you end up not liking something that you purchase, I promise you this man will make it right for you, and you'll be happy at the end of the day. So thanks for tuning in. Share, like, and subscribe. Check out survivalgear.us and weatherwool.com for more info. Sigma 3 out.
Thank you.